Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sunidhi Gupta, and I welcome you all on behalf of Team Arthniti to our first panel discussion under the event head Find Barter in collaboration with the Center of Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. The topic for today's panel discussion is application of complexity economics and applied spirituality in public policy, where our panelists would talk about what complexity economics and applied spirituality imply and its application in modern policy world. Now, I'd like to hand over the mic to our board members Akrit and Mehak.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today at Arthniti's first in-person and joint initiative with the Center for Complexity Economics at JGU.
I'm Akrit, the president.
And I'm Mehak, the vice president of Arthniti, JGU's Economic Society.
Now, first off, we'd like to extend our gratitude to Team CEASP, Dr. Singh, Dr. Patra, and Ms. Divya Bhatnagar for being here with us today.
We fondly remember when the society had its beginnings virtually and was started by a group of students who had never even met before. But today, both of us have watched it grow from being an idea to a fully fledged society with an active membership of over 60. It has truly been a journey for the ages. And all of our gratitude for that goes to the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, the Dean, Professor Sudarshan Ramaswamy, our faculty advisor, Professor Subhashish Ray, and the JSGP admin, Ms. Manimala and Mr. Lalit Nepolia.
Now, we believe that economics is at the root of how we function every single day. Now, whether we know it or not, we're always making decisions that will give us the best outcome while exerting the least effort. Now, that's what economics is all about. Our goal here is to make the understanding of economics accessible to everyone interested in the subject. Now, we have an inclusive and diverse student community from different schools within JGU, and we see them every day bringing their new unique perspectives to the field and to the functioning of our society.
So far, we have published 2 editions of our magazine, The Ordinary Mercantile. We have received contributions from students and faculty across the university. Each edition had a specific theme around which we received submissions. But this semester, we wanted to change things up and introduce a new initiative, a place not restricted to a theme where there is room for diverse thoughts.
Now, as our society gathers more experience, more members, more attention, this idea that emerged to create a new platform catering to academic discourses and fostering intellectual reflections came about. Now, by inviting submissions from individuals both within and outside our society aspires to generate a continuous stream of economic discourse from people in a myriad fields. Now, our new initiative shall now help Arthniti's mission of making a forum on economics accessible to all in tandem with pre-existing undertakings. So here we proudly present our newest initiative, the Arthniti blog. Thank you.
On that note, we invite all submissions, creative and academic and economics related, on a rolling basis. This is your chance to make the pen mightier, express your ideas, and get published. All of the submission details can be found on our website. We'll be sending out a call very soon with a link to our website for you to read our previous articles and send in your submissions. So please be on the lookout. We look forward to seeing your submissions.
All right, so now we have that out of the way. Here's the moment you've all been waiting for, the panel discussion with the CEASP. We'll hand it over to Sunidhi. Please enjoy.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing some questions at the end of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akrit. Thank you, Mehak. Now, to begin with the panel discussion, I'd like to start by introducing the panelists for the afternoon. We have with us Professor Naresh Singh, Vice Dean and Professor JSGP, Director, CEASP. With a PhD in Environmental Studies and more than 3 decades of experience in public policy at forums such as United Nations Development Programme and the International Labour Organization, Professor Naresh Singh is the founding director of the center. His work focuses on decision making in complex situations like peace building, sustainable livelihoods, and complexity theory. Professor Singh has taught at various universities, including Boston, Harvard, Fordham McGill, Waterloo, and Guelph, and is currently also a visiting professor at the University of Ottawa. It's our pleasure to have you, sir. We all. We also have with us Professor Sudeep Patra, Associate Professor JSGP, founding member CEASP, with a PhD in mathematical modeling in finance from the University of Glasgow and a prior background in physics. Professor Sudeep Patra is a founding member of the center. His research works are in emerging fields of quantum-like modeling, complexity economics, and quantum foundations. He has been invited as visitor in prestigious institutes like IIT Bombay, Aston University UK, Chiang Mai University Thailand, and is also associated with the Policy Lab at the Jindal School of Government Policy. It's our pleasure to have you too, sir. And as the final panelist, we have Ms. Divya Bhatnagar, lecturer JSGP and researcher CEASP. Ms. Divya Bhatnagar completed her master in public policy from the University of Chicago and brings her background in engineering and astrophysics to her research at the center. Her previous projects with the UNICEF and the Indian government reflect her interests in sustainability, education, and international development, among other issues. It's our pleasure to have you too, ma'am. With that, we would also like to introduce the moderator for the afternoon, Ms. Pranavi Singh, pursuing Masters in the Economics, with her interests lying in sustainable development, complexity, and development economics. She's also the head of outreach at Arthanity. Now, I'd like her to take over.
Thank you, Sunidhi. Good afternoon, professors. Good afternoon, everyone who is attending the session. We welcome you all. Before we start the discussion, I would like you to introduce what complexity economics and applied spirituality is, so that our audience gets a context of the conversation.
This is on? Yeah, okay. Right, so thanks very much, Pranavi, and welcome to all of you. It's great to see that so many of you on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend. It must mean that you are either very loyal members of Arthanity or you have a deep interest in this subject matter, or of course, both. Let me give you a quick intro as to why we do what we do at the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. And you are all members of this economic society, or most of you are. So human civilization has progressed over decades, over centuries, and we have seen economics change from the time of Adam Smith, who one might consider as having been the first complexity economist. And after that, of course, the mathematicians took over. And with due respect to my friend Sudeep, they sort of fell in love so deeply with mathematics that they forgot about reality. And so they built a great edifice of mathematics. And then they wondered, so what happened to the way people live and distribute goods and services? And where do we live? Do we have an ecosystem at all? They had forgotten all about that because the economic system had become an end unto itself. So society didn't really matter, nor did the ecosystems of the world, until, of course, we are in a big mess, as many of you know. So we have climate change, and we don't seem to be able to get out of it. Because as you know, while we have the Paris Agreement of 2015, where the world committed to reducing greenhouse gases, to burning less carbon, in fact, the years 2018 and 2019, 2020 dipped a little bit because of COVID-19 and the economy got shut down, but it picked up back right after that. We emitted more greenhouse gases than ever before. So we are not on the path to keeping the temperature increase to below 2 degrees. We are on a path to nearly 4 degrees, which is going to create real havoc. We are living through one of the hottest Aprils ever in this part of the country. And imagine when it gets worse than this, and when coal runs out, because it's going to run out at some point. So we are creating a big mess. That's the big point. And because economics did not have much to do with reality, it had great mathematics, don't get me wrong. And it also influenced policy. We recognized that we needed a change. We needed to train our students and even our faculty with thinking about the way economics works, the systems with which it deals, and the way it contributes to policy. So when we talk about complexity economics, and my colleagues will explain more in depth what this is all about, the word complex is not used in the sense of complicated. It is used in the sense of the reality of the relationships among many things. And that's what we call complex systems. So the example I normally give is, if you send a rocket to the moon, that's complicated. But you can get it right. Humanity is able to get it right so well that the private sector is taking it over, and Elon Musk and SpaceX mastering the art and going to make it commercial, working very well. Complicated, but we can manage it. Complex is like bringing up a child. There is no manual. So if you bring up one child well, if you use the same with another child, it might not turn out that well, because the child has a mind of its own, adapting, changing constantly. Ecosystems do that. Economic systems do that. Social systems do that. Your brain does that. These are all complex systems. The economic system, therefore, is the thing that we wanted to study in this way. And my colleagues will talk about that. And let me just quickly say something about applied spirituality. I'll come back and tell you more about the detail. In public policy, we are busy solving the problems that are outside somewhere there. But we never think about what's happening in here and how it's related to what's happening out there. And that's what we try to do. So that's why we have this complicated name: Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. It was already too complicated. That's why we did not put in quantum-like modeling, although we do quite a bit of work on that as well. So that's my introduction to the center.
Thank you, sir. Professor Sudeep, could you please explain what complexity economics means? Because Professor Naresh talked about it, but I think it'll give the audience a better idea of what it means.
Thank you. I think that first of all, as Professor Singh really set up the stage so well, let me also quote another great Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, David Hume. So he reminded us that be a philosopher, but amidst all the philosophies you do, still be a man. So, that is one thing which was missing from the earlier paradigm of economics. So it was so related to mathematics and so building up theorems and proving theorems that we really got completely divorced from how really we are creating reality. I won't say that how reality works, because that means that there's an objective reality out there. As Professor Singh so well put, that it is participatory realism in a way. We are creating our own reality. So going back to complexity economics, first of all, we need to see that why we can call that as a different paradigm. Why it is not the case that is just a modification of earlier neoclassical thinking. So there we have to emphasize upon the foundational assumptions. when you do standard microeconomics in all the sessions that you do, we see that there are some standard assumptions about rationality, about how you solve a particular optimization problem, mainly given certain budget constraints like time constraint, money constraint, etc. But that is pretty much it is. And then certainly neoclassical economics has gone into various areas, into general equilibrium analysis, etc. But when it comes to complexity economics, the basic assumptions about how we create our reality through various relations, that is very much different. So the first important difference is that, we live in a particular world which we have created, which have very interesting nonlinear relations between each other. It is not very easy to say that if A causes B and B causes C, then C should be caused by A, the transitivity relation. In reality that we create, the relation must be much more nonlinear. C can further cause back A, C can further feed back into A. So these are the interesting things that complexity modeling, or complexity science, I should say, as a whole, brings on the table, which was really not very well understood in the earlier paradigm. The second thing can be like deep uncertainty. So we create a particular reality where there is a deeper sense of uncertainty, which is not explained by, what is known as risk. So you see that if you look into some very pioneering works by David Colander and others whom we collaborate a bit, so they have pointed out this very well, that one is hedgeable risk. Neoclassical economics is very much based on that Arrow-Debreu model, etc., asset pricing model. But on the other hand, there is something which cannot be quantified so easily. It is beyond hedgeable risk. That is uncertainty. And then complexity economics would really like to see that how we make policies, how we make adjustment, how we make our day-to-day living itself, given that kind of deep uncertainty, which is often called as ontological uncertainty, just to take that technical name. So then certainly there are other principles also which we will carry on over the discussion a bit. For example, the principle of emergence, that is how these relations that we have created among each other, they have created greater and greater emergence in society, which is very, very difficult to predict from your fundamental units or fundamental principle. As we say very simply, that whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So that is another very important principle of complexity science as a whole, and complexity economics as an application of this. So these are the areas in which we are thoroughly interested in, because we see that these are foundational shifts from the neoclassical model. And I would also like to talk about equilibrium very much, because you see neoclassical economics is very much based on the idea of static or dynamic equilibrium. But here we are talking about something else. Here we are talking about non-equilibrium analysis. And non-equilibrium analysis is not simply a cosmetic change from equilibrium. It is like kind of where, you see that there's some interesting physical system like compound pendulum. So if you just kind of tickle the compound pendulum a bit, you will find that it keeps on kind of coming back, but not quite so to the earlier configuration. It comes back, but not quite so. So this is something like kind of a non-equilibrium kind of a thing, which builds in. And it is a very interesting study that can happen in economics also. So these are the areas that we would be very much interested. But again, going back to Hume, that we need to be human beings also. We can't keep on doing mathematical stuff. So we really need to see that how all of these things relate to real policy implications. So there comes in complexity economics. I will talk a bit about quantum-like later on, but more importantly, it is spirituality. And remember that spirituality, by this, we do not mean any religious study. It is secular spiritualism by which we mean. And that has tremendous implication for, when you bring that as a fundamental principle, your complexity view will also enrich much more. So here I would just like to begin, and then I give to Divya.
Yeah. So thank you, sir. That was pretty interesting and complex, I would say. Ms. Divya, I would like to know what kind of work are you involved in with the center? And just could you explain a bit in simpler terms so that students can also understand?
So I wanted to talk about applied spirituality as well. Professor Patra explained in detail what complexity economics is, and it feels like he has given me a good way to build on it. So as human beings, each and every one of us, we are wired to explore our world. We are wired to understand our world and understand reality, make sense of the reality, and understand our identity. So it is possible that I may start identifying myself with the work I'm doing. Maybe I can confine my identity to my friends and family. But in fact, the reality, my reality or anybody's reality is much bigger than that, right? So my reality tells me I am in Sonipat. Sonipat is in Haryana. Haryana is in India, and then India is in Asia. Asia is in the world. So this is my reality, and the world. It's not just countries. We have people, other human beings, other beings, animals, and we have nature. So this is my reality. And I need to connect with that reality to understand myself completely. Now, most of us, we forget to add one of the most important thing to our reality, and that is ourselves. We don't put ourselves in the scene. And that is why this is called applied spirituality. And as Professor Patra mentioned, it is secular spirituality. So we don't want to go into the domain of religion, but secular spirituality. So this, like in the modern world has given us a lot of gifts, but it has also, in a way, contributed towards a disconnection to other human beings, to other beings in general, and the nature, and most importantly, to ourselves. So, and this is reflected in our development frameworks, in our economic systems as well. None of them includes an inner dimension. It never talks about well-being, happiness, our emotions, our thoughts, our consciousness. It doesn't talk about that. So that is what applied spirituality is, and that is we are trying to include that into public policy, and we are making lots of efforts to let people know about what applied spirituality in terms of public policy will mean. And then Pranavi asked me, what projects are we doing? So the projects are directly related to public policy. We have quite a different projects, and there are like first project that I can mention is there are the book projects for applied spirituality and sustainable development, and another book project is for complexity economics. So for the applied spirituality and sustainable development book project, we are trying to connect public policy, spirituality, and the components of it. So for example, we are connecting it with law, politics, conflicts and conflict resolution, peace, gender equality, Gandhian philosophy of applied spirituality and public policy, quantum physics, and wisdom, consciousness models. And we are using Buddhist and Taoist systems model as well. So this book about applied spirituality and sustainable development will be first of its kind, and it will be like an introductory text for students, for policymakers, and anybody who wants to read it. And then another book project that Professor Patra will definitely, he will delve into it. It talks about complexity economics and how all the systems are not, just individual in silos, but they are all connected and they make something bigger. So you cannot just identify I cannot identify myself with just my hand or just my leg. The whole personality, my legs, my hand, my personality makes me, right? So, and it is bigger than the components, as Professor Patra said. So this is the book about complexity economics. And then we have several events that we are regularly hosting, events like book launch events, open lectures, guest lectures. We have invited some eminent scientists, philosophers, policymakers to our centers, like Minaz Kafatos, Donald Hoffman, Stuart Kaufman. So these guys are also collaborating with us for the projects, book projects. And then besides the events, we have a very important collaboration with Dr. Annalose Smithsman, and that is about the seeds constitution. You can probably Google it when you're free. And this constitution basically tries to transform and build a new economic system and governance system by using technologies like the distributed ledger system, which is Bitcoin, and using the similar technologies, decentralized ledger systems. And then this is seeds constitution. Another one is soil regeneration. This is a potential project we are thinking about venturing into. Did I leave anything? I think. Oh, okay. So those were the several projects. Thank you, Pranavi.
Thank you, Ms. Divya. Now, we talked about the projects that you have been doing, and we talked about what applied spirituality and complexity economics means. Could you give us some applications in public policy and the real world so that we can relate to it more?
Right. So that's the.
Just hold it a bit closer to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's of course the main thing. After all, our center is a part of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. So the work we do must relate to public policy. Let me give you the first connection. Let's take the big problem I just mentioned of climate change. I just mentioned to you that we have been trying to address the problem of climate change formally and in international circles since 1990. In fact, I was involved at the Second World Climate Conference in Geneva in 1990. That has put us at over 3 decades of work. And it is, yes, we have made progress, but we have not made anywhere near enough progress in terms of public policy. So what is missing, and what kind of analysis do we do that can help transform the policy-making process and in fact inform the kinds of policies we are making? So 2 things happen. See, the climate system is a complex system. Now, many people who are modeling the climate system know this, so that's nothing new. But when we translate it to public policy making, we then come back to a linear deterministic set of assumptions to make the public policy. Now, how do you marry the reality of complexity, which the system really is, with the way we make public policy? And that's what we are tackling and showing that what would public policy makers have to change? What would they have to do differently? How would they, first of all, understand the word systems? So in systems thinking, we move from individual objects or variables to the relationship among and between the variables and the actors. So you begin to get that into the head of the policymaker. You then begin to think of things such as nonlinearity. Now that's a big word. And if you go to a public policymaker, if you go imagine talking to a union minister and starting out by saying, sir, I'm here to talk to you about nonlinearity. You've lost him forever, right? You probably, if you're lucky, get a cup of tea and then you're asked to leave. So you have to be able to show, what are we talking about? And when you are able to show that what you are talking about is a situation in which 1 and 1 no longer adds up to 2, he might think you're crazy, but hopefully he will be intrigued. And then you can begin to explain how, when you make policy, you will have to act in a way in which there is a non-proportional representation between your effort and your result. So you look for what we call tipping points, where you can make a small policy change and get a big policy outcome. Otherwise, and these are what we call feedback loops in the system. So as soon as you understand the feedback loops, if you work with a loop that reinforces the problem, you are not likely to solve it. If you identify the loop that is already self-organizing to begin to solve the problem, then a small investment will allow you to get a big result. As soon as he hears the word investment and that you can get a big impact and a lot of people will benefit in time for the next elections, the chances are that you will get his attention. And that's how you make the connection between all these crazy intellectual concepts and the real world of policy making. Or if you take another example, and you take climate change, but you want to find out what is really causing this problem. So you do what we call a root cause analysis. You do the analysis of why do we have this problem? Why is the problem? So we are burning too much carbon, right? We know that. Too much greenhouse gases. Why do we have too much greenhouse gases? Because we are obsessed with growth. We want more and more economic growth based on material consumption. Why are we doing that? We are doing that because we want to keep up with our neighbors, and we want to consume more and more and more, even more than we really need. Why are we doing that? And somebody will tell you because of greed. And then they will say, but there, now you can do nothing. That stops there, right? Because human beings are by nature greedy. I was taught that at school as well, and I believed it for a long time. Now I no longer believe that. Now I know that human beings are greedy, but that's not my true nature. I have been conditioned to believe that. So I keep consuming more and more. I have one car, I want two. If the neighbor has three, I want three as well. And you keep on going like this. So now you ask the next question, why are we greedy? And the answer to that question is, it is because you do not know who you truly are. You assume that you are just a walking, moving mass of protoplasm, which has self-interest and which consumes. And that's all that life is about. When you go deeper into it and you ask, who am I? Who is saying this is my body? So it can't be that I'm my body, right? Because something is asking, who is my body? And you go below that, and that's called meditation. And you go deeper in, you then come to the conclusion that you are not your body, and you are not your thoughts, and you are not the ego that is driving you to consume more and more and more. And you are not by nature greedy. Then you come to an understanding of what you are not. You might not be able to understand what you are. That's a very difficult one. So the yogis use a process called neti neti in Sanskrit, meaning not this, not that. But then finally you come, the closest words we have are pure awareness or consciousness and so on. But these words are not really accurate because we go beyond the mind and beyond thought. Now that's spirituality, but our work is not so much on spirituality as it is on applied spirituality. So you see the connection, how I linked climate change through greenhouse gases, through more and more economic growth, through human greed, until I come to pure spirituality. And that's the link. I don't think I've ever said it that well before. I hope it's clear. I wanted to make it very clear for a non-technical audience.
Yes, sir. So applied spirituality, that concept is somewhat clear, but how do we urge the policymakers to use it, even complexity economics, because it's saying that everything is interrelated and there are feedback loops in the system. But how do we urge or convince the policymakers to utilize this theory? Because unless and until we make them use it and they are used in the policy world, there's really no result from studying it.
Let me just answer partly that and then I'll add it. So like how do you change any policy? So I've spent 30 years of my life, as you said, in the introduction, working with policymakers. I've worked in about 70 countries around the world with senior policymakers, mainly ministers of government, secretaries, and so on. And the same way you change policy, which is not easy. So how do you do it? You do it depending on that context and the nature of the policymaker. You look for the opportunity for change. Give you one or two examples. So in India, we have a great opportunity because we have a prime minister who thinks he's talking about spirituality, but he's busy talking about religion and creating a lot of trouble at the same time, creating some good as well. We have to give him that, but creating a lot of problems. We might have an opportunity, you see, a door through which we can begin to talk about an alternative way. Prime Minister, this is the way you will both win the next elections with a big majority, and at the same time, achieve your policy goals, whether they're driven by the RSS or not. We are not on television, are we? No, okay. But that's all right, I talk policy anyway. So here is another example. I was working in Egypt. I'm going to take the risk and call names. I am working for the UN in Egypt, and my colleagues in the UNDP tell me that the only way you can change policy in this country is to come with a check of 100 million US in one hand and the policy reform on the other hand. And with that check, that like US aid can pay a check like that, they can then offer a policy change, and then it will change. So if you come like UN, we have ideas, we have no money, you can't change anything. So I was working in the villages of Egypt with poor people, and I had to change a policy which said that I believe the first son had to go to the army before he can go to the hotel training school. We wanted that policy change. And I asked and was able to convince Susan Mubarak to become the patron of the Association of Women of that organization. And she agreed. Now that time we had the president of Egypt was Hosni Mubarak. His wife was Susan Mubarak. Susan Mubarak becomes the patron of this organization. And then I say, Madam First Lady, but there's one little problem we need some help with, which is this policy shift. Maybe you can have a word when it's, with the president, see what's possible, changes. So on the one hand, it might be money. On the other hand, it might be tact. And I think we have a chance in India of doing that. One of my students said to me one day, sir, but this idea of applied spirituality and public policy is very new. It will take a long time. And I said, spirituality is new to India? Was it not there 3,000 years ago? Why do we think it is new, right? So we have a great chance. Here is the policy question. Can India not lead the world to a new capitalism that will be based on maximum well-being of all humans and not increasing wealth in the hands of the few? My answer to that question is yes, maybe.
Yes.
Could you just elaborate on how complexity economic? Sorry, questions we'll take later on. Professor Patra, could you elaborate on the public policy applications of complexity economics?
Yeah. So I think that Professor Singh already elaborated very well. Yes. Complexity economics, as we just earlier mentioned, that it is basically completely a paradigm shift that we have to keep in mind, first of all. So otherwise, the rebuttal would be that, well, you are doing more or less the same thing with some modifications. That is not the case. Now, I will say that there is a very good amount of awareness already been created. Say, for example, I was doing behavioral economics with my students. And I found that at least in the policy-making paradigm or the policy-making arena, there have been a lot of awareness now in big governments, say UK, US, Canada, and various other governments, that we need to kind of shift to some new type of policy programs. So behavioral policy making is very much on the map. So, many governments, you will find that they have dedicated nudge unit. For example, as Professor Singh was mentioning about the president and the first lady. So that was also a nice little example of nudge. So this kind of nudges are being accepted widely now by many governments. Now you see that behavioral policy making and complexity based policy making, they can be very deeply connected. So it is not the case that complexity policymaking, to think about that, you need to be completely kind of aware of, or completely different from that. Behavioral policymaking is related to individual behaviors. We have to change, we have to give nudges or various other so-called designs, behavioral designs to change people's behavior. But then we have complexity view here, which can give rise to a kind of greater networking and greater emergence in society. So behavioral policy making through networks of people, that may give rise to a greater emergence in society. And in that way, complexity-oriented policy making can work. And there are many areas in which we can think about. For example, from our center also, we have been working on two specific projects. I think Divya might elaborate more on that. One is human learning systems, and the other one is narrative policy making. Now you see that narrative economics has been a kind of like a buzzword for some time after Robert Shiller, the Nobel Prize winner, wrote his latest book, Narrative Economics. But narrative policymaking has also been kind of coming in, where the main thing is to understand that how policymaking can be made effective through building narratives in the economy. And you see that narrative is a classic example of a complexity approach, because narrative is basically creating the networks and creating the emergence out of, again, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So narrative policy making is a great area in which policymakers can also be convinced to some extent, because if you can show them the results coming up through narrative economics and narrative policy making, so they might be interested in that area also. So as Professor Singh rightly mentioned, that in India we have a great chance. We have a great chance to understand these nuances. I think about a month ago, we have got a report from the Indian Economic Survey, that they have been looking into the dimensions of complexity economics or complexity science in policymaking. So that has come from Chief Economic Advisor and so on. Now they have been very clear that they are trying to kind of shift their mindset from, one project at a time kind of an approach to a more related and nonlinear networking approaches between the projects. So if you really want to solve one particular problem, say problem of hunger, so only looking into hunger kind of reductionist way, that won't solve the problem. You really have to see the context again, as Professor Singh was saying. Context has been a very, very important concept in contextuality policy making. Finally, I'd also like to mention that, there is this from a science perspective, there is always this problem of paradox of choice. So neoclassical thinking has already always told us that greater choice is always good. So more and more you consume, greater well-being, etc., etc. A few years back, I was reading a particular book, how we became a consumerist society. I got very depressed. I thought that perhaps this is not the only reason we are here. So, but paradox of choice actually says that even increasing choice in a linear manner is not going to satisfy you after some time. You will be confused. You will be kind of, you will rather get disutility rather than utility from consuming more and more. So these effects of disutility from greater choice cannot be explained by neoclassical policy paradigm or neoclassical economics. We have to come back to complexity or applied spirituality in a way to understand these, ramifications. So this is what I would like to say, but then I would hand it over to Divya, who is much more thorough.
I would ask Ms. Divya to shed a light on how complexity economics and applied spirituality are interrelated, and how does that work out?
So inherently, complexity economics and applied spirituality, I mean, as if you spend some time thinking, as I told just now, that the body is made up of my fingers, my leg, and my hands. But you cannot understand a person from those components. You have to consider the whole package, and the whole package consists of many other things, not just not just the body, not just the thought, it's the whole personality. So complexity economics and connection with applied spirituality, this is a new domain we are entering. We don't have a definition, or we don't know how to explain this, but inherently if we think about it, the complexity economics talks about quantum physics and physical systems, and it opposes the neoclassical economics. And if you talk about applied spirituality, you go into a little bit of a theoretical zone. So I can say probably that complexity economics is a technical explanation of applied spirituality. But this connection, I believe Professor Singh will be in a better position to answer, because we are still exploring this connection, and this is something very new.
Yeah, please elaborate.
If I might elaborate on that a little bit. See, as you all know, there has always been this so-called divide between religion and science, right? So everybody would tell you that these two cannot mix. There's always a conflict between religion and science. Now, when you take the next step and you move from religion to secular spirituality, that's a big step, and that's what we have done. So we are not talking about religion, like they said earlier. We are now talking about a human experience of their spiritual nature, regardless of what their belief systems might be. This is not a belief system. It's a human experience that all humans experience. See, what we did was we studied the mystical core of all the world's major religions. And we found that at the mystical core of Christianity, when you study the works of Father Thomas Keating, Father Thomas Merton, the Desert Fathers, Meister Eckhart, these mystics, John of the Cross, and you go beyond the Bible, the teaching is exactly the same like when you study Sufism in Islam, which is exactly the same like when you study Buddhism, and it's exactly the same as Advaita Vedanta. So when you find the same in all of these major religions, you have confidence that what you're talking will make sense. Now we go beyond religion to spirituality. On the other hand, we go beyond traditional Newtonian science to the newer sciences. So Newtonian science does not work well with spirituality. When you look at the newer sciences of quantum mechanics and complexity theory, then you see that together these are like they have come like two, like they say, two peas from the same pod. They work exactly hand in hand. All the principles of issues like superposition and non-linear, non-locality and entanglement, all of these principles, at least in a heuristic sense, can have meanings in applied spirituality. And they seem to work hand in hand. So that's where these two are connected. Like Divya was saying, when we started this work, we were searching, we had a gut feeling that something was right here. But now the evidence is coming to the fore. We are able to document it. We had one of the world's leading neuroscientists, Don Hoffman from the University of California, who wrote the book called Against Reality. Why is it that human beings cannot understand reality quite easily? Reality is as it really is. We've gotten his kind of work and work of one scientist called Menas Kafatos, who is a quantum physicist and a practitioner of Kashmiri Shaivism. All of this evidence we are now able to bring together, and we come to a new paradigm. Let me put this one with you. You know, you probably will believe that matter is the fundamental aspect of the world, right? You see all these physical things in your bodies and everything else. So it must be that matter is the fundamental thing. So we have been trying for 30 years to try to find out how consciousness arises from matter. And every attempt so far has failed. Now, they have shifted the paradigm on its head. And we are now finding the evidence to show that matter is not primary, consciousness is primary, and matter arises from consciousness. That takes you very close to applied spirituality, but it comes from the latest neuroscience research. So that's where we are at now.
Can I add one thing to Professor Singh's comment about that matter is not primary? So I was discussing in class today, and in astrophysics too, Professor saying that 95% of matter is dark matter. We don't know anything about it, and 5% is the only thing that we are able to, able to see and touch and feel. So 95% of the whole universe is unknown to us. Like, we don't know anything about it. So it's just wonderful to even see the parallels between astrophysics, quantum physics, spirituality. So it's very exciting.
Professor Naresh mentioned that the center is also working towards quantum-like modeling. So Professor Sudeep, could you briefly explain what it is and what is the objective of that research?
Yeah, the brief answer would be everything is quantum. But certainly we are not saying that. That is a very reductionist way to put it. Just let me give a very brief history, maybe just 1 minute, 2 minutes. You see the relation between quantum physics and consciousness, as Professor Singh was saying, and say thought processes also, cognition, that is quite old. So if you go to 1920s, even 1920s, 1925, when quantum mechanics was really rising as a new paradigm, Niels Bohr was the founding father of the so-called Copenhagen school, and then there were like young Turks, all geniuses, wherein Heisenberg and Schrödinger and Pauli and so on and so forth. Even from then onwards, Niels Bohr particularly had this thing in mind that there can be some interesting analogies between the formalism of quantum mechanics and the way human thought processes occur. And he has been writing that quite explicitly at that time. What are those formalisms? First of all, contextuality, as we are talking a lot about that. So quantum physics was the first one to show that, context in which an experiment is occurred or context in which a measurement is occurred, that really has a direct influence on the experimental result. Without context, it doesn't make even sense to say that what is the result. Now you see that this was a fundamental departure from so-called Newtonian science, because Newtonian science was all objective, all non-contextual. So it is something outside you, and you are just kind of exploring that. So quantum physics was the first one to kind of challenge that severely. And later on, Bohr also thought that, well, this is also the way in which human cognition works. Our decision making is very, very contextual, and there are deep uncertainty relations in our decision making. Later on, this idea was taken forward by Pauli, another great quantum physicist. He had a great conversation with, history of conversation with Carl Jung, who was another psychoanalyst of his time. And Pauli started calling it as psychophysics also. But very unfortunately, he passed away very soon, rather. Later on, this kind of principles were talked upon and taken forward by David Bohm a lot. David Bohm came up with his great framework of implicate order. Implicate order is very much again relating to complexity, complexity science. So all of these things were happening. Now, quantum-like paradigm, I should say, that started from late 90s, basically, more formal. When some of the collaborators we know, Andrei Krenikov and Immanuel Haven, they started coming up with certain kind of more concrete mathematical frameworks through which these principles can be expressed. So that was the advantage. Principles were already known for a long time. So they came up with some interesting mathematical frameworks, and they started applying that to many real data. That was the most important thing. So whether it is financial decision making or political science or certainly decision theory, cognition, there's a huge literature you can see. You can just Google quantum-like modeling and see that many areas has been contributed by this modeling. So quantum-like modeling actually does mean that there are certain basic principles of contextuality, uncertainty, entanglement, or non-locality, which we can discuss later. but then that can be related to all these kind of real world problems and in a way explain human decision making better than the standard formalisms. So at our center then, our main objective will be twofold. One is certainly to understand the foundations that is there, but more importantly, we need to link quantum-like modeling with complexity economics. That is something very, very interesting that is going to happen. And here, and applied spirituality, of course. And here, I would just like to mention one interesting research that has just come out, and we are also thinking in that direction. You see that we have just talked about narrative economics. Now, narrative economics is also related to something known as contagion, that say in financial markets, how, prices spreads like wildfire. Now, that kind of modeling has been done well in complexity science. But one thing which complexity science perhaps can incorporate from quantum-like modeling is that how to do such kind of model given deep uncertainty. So deep uncertainty feature can be further enriched by quantum-like modeling to complexity. So there's a kind of very interesting link that can happen, and researchers are working on that. There are brilliant papers which have been written on this, and these are all based on data. There is no axiomatic thinking as compared to neoclassical. So these, I would say that these are the things happening. And certainly quantum foundations is very, very deep. This goes without saying. And one thing I will just like to end upon here, that what Don Hoffman and we all are kind of understanding, that it is primacy of consciousness that we have to understand. Not matter from consciousness, but the other way around. And still now, standard science is far away from this. Standard science is still now very, very physicalist and reductionist and emergentist. So standard scientists may be very, very angry with this. But actually we see that there's a lot of evidence in which this consciousness fundamentalism is really coming up. There again, applied spirituality links up with all these paradigms. That's
So the quantum-like modeling would make complexity economics more enriching?
Yeah, that is the main point I would like to say, that complexity economics has been quite well in some areas. Say, for example, heterogeneity of agent and emergence and nonlinear feedbacks. But again, the concept of uncertainty, for example, that can be better understood if quantum-like modeling is integrated, because quantum-like modeling has proper mathematical frameworks where uncertainty can be described better, and is technically known as Hilbert space modeling. But then we can discuss a lot on that later on. So in this way, linkages can happen. So in a way, they are reinforcing each other. It's not like saying either or. That is that is one.
The center has also worked upon human learning systems, which is an individual-centric public service management. Professor Naresh, could you please elaborate on what it is and what it entails?
Right. So we are doing a bit of work now to test an idea that is called human learning systems. This idea is how to deliver public service to people, to citizens, in a more effective way, in a more efficient way. You see, when you trace back how public service has been managed over the decades, over the centuries, you find that at the beginning, when there were just kings and no structured public service back in the day, public service was run by magic, by superstition, and by dictates of the kings. Whatever the king said, that became the law of the land. Then, so it was all emotional and superstition based and all of this. Then we had this famous guy who all of you should know about, called Max Weber. So Weber came in, and we have the whole Weberian public administration, which is about compliance, objectivity, rules. So you take out the human element out of it, and it becomes what one might call professional and objective. And the whole public, and the bureaucracy was in fact introduced that way. At that time, bureaucracy was a good word. Of course, now bureaucracy is not a very good word. Most people, when they refer to bureaucracy, they mean something really bad, right? Where things don't work, things are inefficient, red tape, and so on. Anyway, back in the day, Weberian bureaucracy was a big step over the days of the kings. So in order to deal with inefficiencies of Weberian bureaucracy, because it became so cumbersome, so difficult to get anything done. Then it became even corrupted because there were so many laws and rules, you have to pay a bribe to get anything done. So corruption also invaded and corroded the system. Then we introduced something called new public management. New public management is private sector oriented approach to public service. That means managers, metrics, and money. So you have to define your outcome clearly. You have to define how much money you're going to save by doing that and so on. And we tried it. In Canada, where we have one of the best public services in the world, or we are ranked at least between 1 and 5 every time they rank public services of the world, we were kind of proud of the new public management, but it has a lot of limitations because managers tend to measure what they can measure, not what people value. So now we are moving to the era of where we want to measure what people value. We want public servants to be delivering what citizens value, not what they value. So in other words, it's a challenge to the days of the Babu, right? And it's a challenge to the days of what we call mandarins in Canada. We're public, and I was one of them. I was a director general in the Canadian Public Service. But we are all this big, important. We are there to serve the citizens, but because we don't measure what their satisfaction is, we get away with everything. We get big salaries, and we are quite happy. Human learning systems now brings the public service closer to the people. It begins to ask, how do humans behave? How do they realize their own requirements as citizens? And we realize very quickly that you need a systems approach. So while it appears to be individual, it is, in fact, deals with individuals, in households, in communities, in districts, in countries, and in the world. So it's a nested hierarchy of systems at which the individual is at the core. So it's dealing with all those levels. Now it might appear that this is a bit complex or complicated. When you deal with people, they relate to this very easily. It's about learning. It's about getting public servants to be able to learn how to work with people better. So that's what this project is about. In order to do it in India, we had to first check what kind of public service do we have in India? And we looked at the literature. We did a review of the secondary literature. It's very difficult to understand. It's such a mix of all kinds of approaches. So this project involves establishing what we know and then doing some interviews with a range of people, NGOs, public servants, and so on, to understand how Indians get public services, what are the inefficiencies in the system, and whether we can use the human learning systems to make it different. So that's really what the HLS is about. It brings in complex adaptive systems thinking, and hopefully it will be clear that it is not complex as such, but it deals with people.
Since the center has been working in such a new area and an evolving area, I would say, how has your work been received by policymakers or government officials, or even in the academics? So, Ms.
I don't know. Maybe it's me to answer that one because unfortunately, this is at the nexus of what we do. And the answer is, at this point, we don't know. Because our work is so new, it's so different. We started this work about a year ago, and we are working with each other physically, maybe the last 2-3 months. We are getting encouragement when people like, what's his name? Sanjeev Sanyal. When people like him are talking about complex adaptive systems, and he is on chief economic advisor to the government of India, and he's now talking complexity. And when he says things like, Chandigarh is such a well-planned city that it's never going to become a great city. But Gurgaon is not a well-planned city. It is evolving as a complex adaptive system. So it's going to become much greater. I am not saying that. That's the chief economic advisor to the government of India. When he is making that kind of statement, we are seeing the possibility of links with the government of India, and we are encouraged. But right now, we are still to make the direct connection with policymakers here.
Only one thing I will say that from the academics, we are getting some good encouragement. Say all our international partnerships, basically networks, they are also very, well accomplished in their areas. So we are getting some good encouragement from that. But our main objective will be also to relate to policymakers. That is the most important.
Yes.
The academics, of course, they are our, motivators.
Now we'll open the floor for questions. If anyone has, okay.
So thank you for the panel discussion. So I was wondering, I read this book called Market Tremors, and it sort of talks about econophysics and its newer sort of the ways it's applied, the ways it can be applied. And I came across the way that they modeled economic actors in financial markets as participants in a mean field, and they used mean field theory as an abstraction for that. But the problem I came across as someone who's studied this a little bit is that it's sort of like an abstraction for the n-body problem, right? And so how does complexity economics in the way that you're approaching it sort of deal with this abstraction? Because oftentimes that abstraction isn't very accurate, right? Especially when you're modeling it as opposed to, I don't know if I'm being articulate enough.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a great question. First of all, I would like to mention that econophysics as a paradigm, that is not equivalent to what we are saying. So that is a separate paradigm that started from 1980s onwards. And there have been many pioneering scientists we are working with who are in India also, they are working now. Now, econophysics basically takes a lot of clue from, what is called as thermodynamics or, statistical field theory in physics. But complexity economics as a whole, that is not reliant on that. There may be interesting linkages. That is always possible. Say, for example, if you go into the original papers which were written by Brian Arthur, for example, or Diane Farmer, for example, or Stuart Kaufman, you will find that their emphasis was more towards computational models, where you just treat agents as heterogeneous from each other. They have different behavioral parameters, for example. They can be treated differently as behavioral parameters. And say, for example, then they are not totally moving away from the competitive nature of the economy. There can be no homogeneity among the agents. Agents may have different forecast models themselves, and those forecast models can then compete with each other to come up with a kind of emergence in society. So this particular view, you will read one particular paper by Arthur, which came out in 2021, I think, in Nature Physics, where he surveys some of these kind of standard or successful complexity economics models. You may see that they have been very well backed by data. Now, certainly your question about oversimplifications or abstractions, that is always a question. So you see that even going back to neoclassical economics, there were more oversimplifications. So one way to say is that we need to overcome those oversimplifications, reducing, this concept like homogeneity of agent, representative agent, and full rationality, and all of these things we have to come out of that. That is what complexity economics at least help us to do. Now, now how that will be actualized, with what kind of model to really use concretely, that is definitely the choice of the modeler. And again, the contextuality comes in very well. Say, for example, quantum-like modeling is very much different from econophysics. So quantum-like modeling would be very much based on decision theory or cognitive science way of understanding it. So there might be I don't know, but maybe I don't want to kind of upset anyone, but that might be a bit more closer to cognitive realities or more closer to decisions. So the choice depends upon the model, but overall the background has to be clear, what we want to say. Brian Arthur, he's a guru. He's a guru of complexity economics. We were very lucky to have him at our first conference of this center. He might also collaborate with us later on. And Professor Singh has been a long friend of Brian Arthur.
We also have questions online. So we'll take one question online and then we'll come to them.
So there is a question from Prabha. So he's saying that he's really interested in these ideas being discussed. Could you suggest some introductory readings for us to get started in this field?
Yeah, we have talked about several subfields within this broad area that we are working on. So I think the best place to start is our website. So if you take a look at the CEASP website, we have a few blogs and we have some references there. And if the questioner would like to get some references on particular streams of work we are talking about, like quantum-like modeling, complexity economics, applied spirituality, they can write to one of us and we'll be happy. You can write to me directly and I will send it to one of my colleagues and we'll share specific references to those specific interests.
Thank you, Professor.
Now we'll go to her.
Okay. So, this question is directed towards Dr. Naresh. While explaining the applications of quantum physics in spirituality, it was mentioned that matter arises from consciousness. Could you elaborate on this further? Because from my understanding of consciousness, it can only be observed in organic matter, which is less than 0.5 of this universe. And by that logic, why cannot we observe consciousness in inorganic matter, such as this table?
So there is a lot of speculation going on around this area that you have raised, which is quite important. And there are theories like panpsychism and so on that tries to grapple with this. The best explanation that I have is that it's a matter of degree of consciousness. As consciousness tends to zero, if you use the calculus, when something tends to zero, when delta becomes dy, a little bit of that math. I'm going to answer it now. So when it's close to zero, we have inanimate. Rocks, wood, stones, minerals. And as the organization of the molecules, become organic and they become amino acids and they become proteins and they become organs and they become organisms, the level of consciousness rises, the ability to become aware that you are aware then increases. And at the level of the human being, we have the greatest capacity to be aware that we are aware. But then you have, going down that spectrum, you come to a level where things are aware, they are conscious, but they are not aware that they are aware. So in other words, they are conscious in the sense of reacting to stimuli. And then you go down to almost zero consciousness, and it appears to us as though those things are not conscious.
So, sir, since consciousness is not observed in all organic matter, and since we're taking a empirical approach to consciousness, meaning trying to measure it, would you say that an ant has a consciousness level above zero, since its biological structure is not yet full, like the brain is also not fully developed? So would you say it has above zero?
Yes, absolutely. I have no doubt in saying that. But let me give you, to make it very clear, when you say it's not observed. See, I was trained as a scientist, long before a natural scientist, long before I became a social scientist. So when we say, I used to work on toxic chemicals in the environment, like, DDT or any other toxic chemical. When I say that there is no DDT in this water, you know what I mean in science? I cannot detect the levels of DDT in this water. That's all I mean. So when we say we cannot observe it, it just is the limitations of our own ability to measure that, whether that be through our senses or through our instruments. So that's why my answer to your question is yes. It's above zero, but sometimes unobservable by humans. The yogis are apparently can be in resonance with the frequency of all objects, even those that appear to be unconscious to us. So it's a bit of a complex theory.
Maybe if I
Yes, sir,
add,
go ahead.
you see, the observation point is very important, and that relates to the fundamental problem in quantum physics. So you know that there is a problem called as a measurement problem in quantum physics. It basically says exactly what Professor Singh was saying, that when you don't measure a particular system or don't observe a particular system, which means that you don't interact with that system behaves in a different way. It kind of evolves in time based on a particular equation. It's often called a Schrödinger equation. But when you make a measurement, then it actually takes one particular value. That is often called as a kind of like a collapse of the wave function, if you may use that particular word. Now, the question here is that who is making that measurement? How that measurement is happening? So whether consciousness has a role to play in that kind of a measurement. And that's one of the central mysteries in quantum physics as of now. So some scientists as of now, say for example, John Neumann, who was like a mathematical genius, then Eugene Wigner, David Bohm, they were more in the view that conscious observers who has this kind of higher than zero level of consciousness, etc., they play a crucial role for that particular so-called wave function collapse to happen. Now, this is one particular view, which means that consciousness has a primacy over the matter. Otherwise, this might not happen, because consciousness has to be different from these, the typical rules of quantum mechanics to make that collapse of the wave function happen. And that is also one of the reasons that why people like Don Hoffman and others, they would go for consciousness fundamentalism. So that is beyond matter in that way. Yeah. Case Against Reality, it's a famous book. The opposite book you can read from David Chalmers, which has just come out, Reality Plus, and then you can make up your mind.
My question is to Professor Sudeep. You had briefly mentioned about how complexity economics can better explain financial or market failures of financial crisis. Could you talk more about that?
Okay, I will say that, you see, there is a huge topic. So, we really have to go through the papers and books, and we need maybe 2 or 3 more seminars on how complexity economics really does it. I will just, there is a huge amount of literature on financial crisis and complexity economics. Not only that, pandemic, just few days back, I was discussing this with my students. There have been very good papers now written on how we can say that pandemic is a complex system, is a complex adaptive system, and what kind of policy responses might be required. And there are many interesting modeling inputs. So modeling can be done in different ways. It can be based on, say, computation, Brian Arthur type, or you can also have qualitative modeling. It is not all mathematizable. Say, for example, there's a very interesting framework that we also discuss at our center, which is called a sense-making framework or conniving framework. That is a more kind of qualitative framework, but very effective. So there are various options available to us. But definitely it's a long topic, so we have to continue discussing. But mathematical models have been developed, but it is always a work in progress. So there is no final answer to anything.
I think we'll end the session now because we have overshooted the time. If there's any last question from anyone. Yeah.
Good afternoon to all the panelists. So my question is fairly simple. I just want to know, I'm curious to know if there are any other domains like healthcare where, complexity economics and applied spirituality can also be applied.
So our work is, as you know, because we are, of course, in the School of Government and Public Policy, we are focused on how to use these ideas to improve the functioning of government, delivery of public service to citizens, and improving policies which impact, for example, our main research is in the area of sustainable development policy. So how is it that we can use these ideas to advance the achievement of the sustainable development goals? So our students are researching on all of these 17 goals to see how we can help, how India can progress and how Niti Aayog can move forward on all of these. But individually, these disciplines are being applied in a whole range of humanities, of social sciences, decision-making sciences. It's work that is cutting across almost all of humanities and social sciences. Now, a very interesting area is in politics. So we have just begun our discussions and our thinking on how to evolve a new paradigm of politics where this kind of thinking will make sense. Because if the politics does not change, then this will not be used in policy. Because politics and policy, they go hand in hand. So that's another area. So it's applicable in a whole wide range of areas.
We'll just take one question from you.
Well, quantum physics helps us to have a mirror of evolution, but the real question is, how does the recent work on evolution lead us to this conclusion that we are sharing, that consciousness is primary? And that work, which is really excellent mathematical modeling of evolution, comes from the reference we just gave you, which is the Don Hoffman's work, and the book is called The Case Against Reality. In fact, it shows that any species that spent enough time trying or being able to deal with reality would have spent so much time on managing reality that they would have failed as a species and would not have evolved. So the fact that we are here is testimony to the reality that we can't understand reality. So he gives a very interesting example where he says that if you look at the icon on your computer screen and you see a blue icon looking like an envelope, there is a whole bunch of software behind it that makes your mail system work. If your attention had to deal with that whole set of software programming that's behind that icon, you will never have time to answer your email. Therefore, the icon is there to help you. Similarly, human beings in the jungle had to develop these symbols in order to manage and escape from the tiger quickly enough in order to survive. So let us put it that the recent evolutionary work and mathematical modeling of human neuroscience leads us to the conclusion that consciousness is primary. I don't know whether quantum-like modeling supports it, but you might.
I will rather add another interesting just dimension, because you see, we were talking about applied spirituality a lot. And this comes back to our recent work that I'm doing with a very senior scientist in India, Professor Patra. He's a very widely noted quantum physicist. And we were surprised to see that some of the implications of, say, quantum physics has been way back understood in a different way in our Indian philosophical traditions. We have just forgotten that. There is one particular tradition called as Jainism. And in Jainism, there is a particular sect called, philosophical thinking called as Siyavad. Now, Siyavad talks about probabilities. Now, these probabilities follow a particular logic, which is not standard binary logic. Yes, no, either true or false. There is another third state, And that third state is called as avaktyam. Avaktyam means that which cannot be manifested. It is something like, in the process. We call process philosophy a lot. That is already been stated in that particular philosophy. Now we are using that particular philosophy to come up with, a quantum-like modeling of human brain and human consciousness. So I think that it is fantastic that Indian heritage has to be understood much deeply, and Don Hoffman also agreed with us in that Advaita Vedanta or whatever. Even modern interpretations of quantum mechanics actually takes a lot from them. So that is what I would like to say.
We wrap it up, Pranavi. Just a closing remark, and that is to say that we are very happy to welcome you colleagues and people who are interested to get involved in this work. We have very concrete, practical projects in which you can become involved as well. And Pranavi and other colleagues who are working, there are several of them here, can tell you about the work we are doing. If you are interested, it can get really practical as well, like helping with a book project or helping with interviewing people on how HLS works. So it does not have to be mathematical or philosophical. It could be otherwise. But if you want to get involved in the philosophical, the spiritual, and the scientific, there are opportunities as well. So we welcome all of you, if you're interested, to let us know and to join us.
I think I speak on behalf of everyone who has witnessed this event. The center has been doing exceptional work, and I'm sure that the students living here from here today would be more motivated to be affiliated with the center. I personally look forward to the work that center is doing, and I'm sure now the students would also be interested now they've been introduced to the center. And I think internationally also, because I've attended some sessions with the center, I think you're taking the university's name forward as well. So I thank you all for joining us. And even the audience over here who have participated in the discussion. And thank you, Professor Singh, Professor Patra, and Ms. Divya Bhatnagar for introducing us to this novel concept. Now I'll hand it over to the President and the Vice President of Atneti, Akrit and Meher.
That was an amazing session, wasn't it? We were just sitting in the front row the whole time, and we were just looking and listening to everybody. We were just in awe. Thank you so much for that. And yes, Meg, please.
So, as we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter words, but to live by them. It is our privilege to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the entire Artsmiti team.
Now, today's panel discussion was the start of a collaboration that we certainly look forward to exploring so much more. Now, before we say goodbye, there are a few people that we would formally like to thank. First off, our Dean, Professor Sudarshan Ramaswamy, unfortunately couldn't be here with us today due to an emergency. And of course, our panelists, Dr. Singh, Dr. Patra, and Ms. Divya Bhatnagar for taking their time, gracing us with their presence and taking things to the next level for us.
We also thank our faculty advisor, Mr. Subhashish Ray, for his constant support and guidance. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us today. Our JSGP admin, Ms. Manimala and Mr. Lalit, who have been a great help in planning this event.
And of course, gratitude goes to the audiovisual team and the JGU events team as well. And finally, all of you, I'd like to thank everybody here who's taken the time to be here with us today. Thank you so much. I hope this session would inspire you to apply to the work that CIAST has been doing and to whatever Artniti has been doing as well. Next semester, we'll be having a new set of inductions, hopefully, and we're looking forward to seeing all of you there as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming here. Till we see you the next time, very, very soon. Thank you so much. That's it from us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.